Hey guys, Valky here, and I'm sure when you clicked on this video, you had one question. How to use the artifact selectors we get during the 6th anniversary event. The only thing you guys have to know about this is that this is not a tier list of how good they are. That would be this video, which I'll link in a pinned comment. But this current video will be a guide on how to choose the best artifact from a selector and what units they can be used for, especially if you're just starting out in the game. So let's get right into it. Outside of the ones from the collab, the limited summons, and the ones we get for free, these are the must-have artifacts of Epic 7, as in every account must have one if they want to do all content normally and not feel like they're being put at a huge disadvantage for the most basic forms of content. If you're missing any of these by the end of the anniversary period, picking up any of these is never a bad idea. Rod of Amaryllis is basically the healer artifact in Epic 7. Most Soul Weavers have one non-attack skill on a fairly low cooldown and one on a longer cooldown. It's just natural synergy. It'll heal your character that needs it the most anywhere from the day you start the game to the day you stop playing. Bloodstone is a mainstay for AoE damage-based rangers like Bellona, Kana, Landy, and Summer Bellona for PvE. Its main job is to turn your damage dealers into a healer, and that does one of two things. Either it makes your runs super safe with 2 healers, or it lets you swap out your Soul Weavers for a defense breaker or a second utility unit, which will let you build your teams more flexibly. Elbrus Ritual Sword is the default knight artifact if they are in fact a damage dealer instead of a tank. All the damage dealer knights in the entire game either has Elbrus as their best artifact or can use it super well, because the extra counter attacks can easily snowball a match in your favor when you are the slower player letting your opponent go first. Even if you only want to play PvE in the end game and never want to touch arena or RTA, this one will be clutch for your guild war and arena defenses. Song of Star is the next must-have. It is rarely used in RTA, but it is essential for Iseria dominated Abyss levels and for Furious for early Wyvern, as a part of the mechanics dictates that you need to land 3 debuffs. Since Wyvern is a huge part of your stamina once you're past your early game, this one is just a must-have because of how often it's going to bail you out. Golden Rose and Sigurd Scythe are 2 sides of the same coin. They're warrior artifacts that give both damage and healing. Golden Rose gives you 1 effect at the time, whereas Sigurd Scythe gives you both effects, but only when you're low HP. Warriors are, by identity, a lot of bruisers, where they need to be able to tank a hit and then hit back themselves and then heal back up. So that makes them really good at endgame 1v1, 1v2 scenarios. That means their artifact becomes their only source of healing, so make sure if you plan on playing any of these units, have one. Side note, I personally think Golden Rose is a bit stronger overall, but pick the one you think sounds better to you. You know, make your own decisions too. Be informed. The last one in the must-have tier is Wind Rider. This is a thief artifact that when you get a kill, it triples the attack it gives you and puts your character in stealth. 1, this keeps your squishy thieves safe from damage and any crowd control like stuns, and 2, this amplifies a thief's biggest strength, snowballing aggressive matchups. On top of being a very solid damage booster, this is essential for playing aggressive thieves late game for any PvP content. If you only want to play PvE, it's okay to skip this. Those are the essential must-have artifacts that you can't really replace. The next tier of artifacts are good both in PvP and PvE, so if you already have everything up top, you can pick something here. However, they're not so important that they can't be replaced, so let's just get into what these are. Celestine is like a weaker version of Rod of Amaryllis. It heals the lowest unit whenever your Soul Weaver attacks. Since good cooldown management on Soul Weaver usually means you can activate Rod pretty reliably, Celestine kind of falls off a little bit, so it's a tier lower. Its biggest advantage is that it kind of goes insane if you plan on playing a counterattack focused playstyle like with these Soul Weavers. Doctor's Beg is great on Soul Weavers that like to initiate aggressive team fights but don't have a lot of cleanse built in like these guys, or you just double up on high tempo stabilizing power like on Blue Elena. Whenever she heals, you can heal a little bit more and then cleanse around the debuffs. Unseen Observer gives you 10 souls for your support rangers and can be essential to PvE to enable some one-shot cheese for Abyss or to play fast and aggressive in PvP. Since it's a known fact that soul burns enable some of the strongest combos in the entire game, if you hit any of these rangers, make sure you grab grab a copy of Unseen Observer for them. Shimadra Staff is super simple. It does two things. It improves healing in general, which actually works on some lifesteal characters, so that's really cool, but it also has an aura that increases effect resistance by 20% for your entire team, which pairs super well with these supports, and it gives you a better chance to just shake off debuffs from the get-go. Idol's Cheer is an aggressive alternative to all the Soul Weaver artifacts, as it gives you combat readiness for your highest attack unit, which usually is super good on aggressive teams with a revive healer as their anchor. If you don't know what that means, this video that I'm putting up in the pinned comments should explain the game's basic terms that high rank players like to use a lot. Samsara Prayer Beads is like Golden Rose or Sigurd Scythe, just without the healing. If a character comes with pre-built healing, or they just don't care about healing in general, it's actually pretty good on them. Otherwise, it can be a pretty good replacement for anything that needs these top tier options, though you'll have to make do without the healing. Shepherd of the Hollow is the best evasion thief artifact. Damage dealer in the thief class comes in two types: the squishy DPS nukers who prefer Windrider, and the evasion thieves who like Shepherd of the Hollow. This is the best artifact for almost all of them. Stella Harpa is kind of like Idol Cheer, except when your Soul Weaver gets hit, it takes a debuff off of your team, so it's just a matchup difference. For mostly the same units, it kind of comes and goes in the metagame, or it depends on what PvE content you're doing. Touch of Rekos is just like Stella Harpa, except it heals your team when the holder gets hit. You put it on a unit that revives others, and it just makes them harder to kill. Sacred Branch is for Soul Weavers that fall into the debuffer category. They don't really have better options outside of limited artifacts, so Sacred Branch gives them some much needed effectiveness, but also assists your carry in cycling their turns and letting your team push a faster tempo in the match. Elegiac Candle only goes on 2 units, so it's kind of a narrow option, but it's so essential for these 2 units because they do so much, as AoE defense breaks after their buff strips usually means you can very easily clear PvE content or OTK your opponent in PvP as long as you're activating even 1 or 2 of them versus 4 enemy units. Alexa's Basket is another tool for thieves to snowball any tempo advantage they can get by giving them upfront value for their attack buff, or greater attack buff. It's usually played on characters like these that win the game if they get one really good turn and get the right kills with that damage they can get. Now, you may be confused why it says 70% and 40%. Doesn't that go over 100? Well, buffs in E7 like greater attack buff will usually overwrite their weaker low bros, so you actually have about a 18% chance to whiff, but the rest of the time it will come in clutch for you and swing a lot of matchups. As far as anything in these first 2 row goes, in my opinion, they're all fine picks with a selector. If you're missing something from the first row, absolutely pick that up. But if you already got the whole row, then picking up something from the second row for a character that you have can go a long way for you. After the second row are the PvE only artifacts. If you plan on making a PvP only dash for the end game and just getting by with PvE, feel free to skip this row. I think that's perfectly fine. But for those of you guys that really want to put an emphasis on PvE, Alabasteron for extra effectiveness, Cradle of Life for a bit more debuffs, Last Tea Time for a bit of AoE damage, Sword of Judgment for some extra attacks, Time Matter and Dignus Orb are both good on Vivian for the sake of Banshee one-shot teams. After them are the PvP only artifacts. We're going to have a lot more options here, but these are Bird Eye Views for any Soul Weavers to give, actually funnily enough, souls, Abyssal Crown to fish for stuns if you like playing debuffs, Goblet of Oath specifically for Peyra, Rhiannon and Luciella for characters like Ran who's fast and have a lot of extra turns, Bastion of Perlucia for characters like Ambitious Tywin or Unbound Knight Arrowell, Will of the Broken Priest for either Brieg or any other damage dealing knight if you don't have enough Elber's Ritual Swords, Double-Edged Decrescent if you don't have Shepherd of the Hollow as a replacement for any evasion thief, Durandal for Bruiser Warriors. This one gives you a lot of combat readiness. Dux Noctis for Cleave Heavy Rangers. That'll be units like Green Pavel and Commander Pavel. Scroll of Shadows from Arya. Specifically, she's a fairly strong unit, so I put it a little bit higher up. Merciless Glutton for any warriors that are primarily nukers, Rise of the Monarch for any knights when you run out of Aureus, Sword of Summer Twilight for any AoE based thieves, and Snow Crystal for warriors that like extra combat readiness push like Shu and Wukong. Now after that, the stat stick row. These are like never the best artifact for any one unit, but they're also a good substitute that give a lot of stats. But stats aren't really what make or break a character when it comes to artifacts. That's what you want your gear for. What you really want for your artifacts to do is attach a whole new mechanic to them. For example, putting Idol's Cheer on your Blood Moon Haste is like the same as adding a line of every time this creature gets hit, draw a card onto a big taunt monster in Hearthstone, since combat readiness is quite literally like draw effects in card games. But for backup options, I think they're always pretty decent. This next category is kind of disturbing. These artifacts affect level up with their activation chance from like 50 to 100, generally speaking, and is what the community calls kind of cringe, because if you don't have them maxed out, there's a chance you just don't have an artifact for a fight. So the selectors aren't worth it unless you already have a few copies and you're using it to bump them to plus 30, the maxed out version. And finally, on the bottom, these are the ones I definitely don't recommend. Either they're not used, or they're only used for one character, or they're usually a backup to a backup option. Alright, so that is all the artifacts in the game, and whether or not they are worthy of a selector, especially if you're coming into the game fresh just like me. And this list is exactly what I will be using myself on my own playthrough for a new account to Masters and Champion Rank Challenge over at twitch.tv/Valky. If you're just starting up, you can check out my run over there, or come over to the Discord to find a new player guild for yourself. And oh yeah, also make sure to like the video and subscribe and the rest of the series for the new player guys, or if you're here for endgame RTA content, that'll resume once the anniversary period is over. So that's it for this video. I'm going to sleep. Bye.